Sean Dotson, and welcome to the first episode of Automation AMA. Ask Me Anything. This is my first pod slash video cast. Is it a podcast or a video cast? I guess the lines are kind of blurred nowadays. Anyway, it's a video cast. So this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. Obviously, AMA comes from the website Reddit. It's a term that means ask me anything, where people would start threads on Reddit who had interesting jobs, or perhaps it was somebody famous or a celebrity who knew something that maybe the general public did not know, and people would ask them questions, and hopefully they'd answer as many of them as possible. So I've solicited some questions from LinkedIn and from some suppliers and some vendors and customers, and wanted to just kind of give back to the industry that has given me a career for the last 28 years. In addition to this, I've gotten a lot of people who are trying to start companies or grow their company, even manufacturers asking me questions about the industry. They just kind of want to know what my experience has been and how I've handled certain things. Everything from finance. How do you deal with customers who want to give you net 180-day terms, to operational things. Do you insource or outsource your machine parts, and what's your philosophy behind that? All the way to marketing questions and all. So being an entrepreneur, having a company for 18 years, you wear a lot of hats, and so you amass a lot of information over the years, and I'm happy to give that back. I'm also a believer that in our industry, as small as it is, there's really not a lot of direct competitors. Now, of course, there's that Venn diagram where we overlap on certain things, and we do compete against each other. But a medical device, specialization company like R&D out of Florida is certainly not going to be a competitor to a robotic welding company out of California, for example. But we're both in that same industry, and we both do very similar things. So why can't we share best practices and help the industry as a whole become better? So to start out this first episode, I asked the LinkedIn community to give me some topics. What are some questions? What do you want to know? And I had two questions come up that were very similar, and they were good introductory questions because they allowed me to introduce myself and a little bit of my history. So I'm going to read the first couple to you here. Jay Boychek said, for those branching out on their own or thinking about it, how do you grow an automation company from the ground up? And the other similar question was from Isaac Bean. You've done something that many people dream of and often fail at. Sharing how you overcame the odds is probably some of the most useful knowledge you could give back to the community. So Jay and Isaac, thank you for those questions, and I'm going to try to answer them. And I'm also going to kind of interweave a little bit of my history and a little bit of background, so you know who I am if maybe you're not familiar with me. So again, my name is Sean Dotson. Went to the University of Florida. Got a bachelor's of mechanical engineering there. Went to work for a company out of Bradenton, Florida, named Adlen Automation. Adlen was a automation company, had its roots in upstate New York back in the 70s. Actually started prior to that, back in the 60s. Moved down to Florida in the late 70s, and they were really pioneers in the automation industry. They were using IBM robots and hydraulic robots. So I went to work for Adlen, pretty much fresh out of school. Really because that was my passion, was robotics and automation. I knew I wanted to do this even back in college. Over the years, we were purchased by a company out of Canada called Gibo, and then one out of one out of France named Seidel. They made blow molding equipment. And then finally, we were owned by Tetra, so a multi-billion-dollar Swedish corporation. At that point, it was 2004. I was leading all of engineering and manufacturing in the Bradenton, Sarasota facility. And Seidel decided they had way too many locations all over the world based on all these acquisitions. So unfortunately, Florida drew the short straw, and they decided that they were going to close our facility. And they asked me to help them move their equipment all over the world. So I moved equipment to France, to Italy, Mexico, China. I moved manufacturing all over the world. And as I did this, we were trying to figure out what to do with this custom automation robotics group, because there were standard products that made sense to get moved around, but custom automation was a little bit of a different animal for them, and they really didn't know where it should go or what they should do with it. So I approached them and said, well, I'm not sure I really want to go get another job, and I really enjoy what I'm doing. So here's a crazy idea. Why don't you let me trade in my my severance package, and we'll purchase what's left of that Adalin automation. So they agreed to it. I talked my two top engineers, Bruce Naylor and Doug Robertson, into coming along with me in this crazy venture. And we ended up starting a company in early 2005 called R&D Automation. So we started the company in 2005 with pretty much a customer list, a couple computers, some chairs, and a pat on the back, and good luck, boys. We moved from a 100 square foot facility with full manufacturing into a unair conditioned 2,500 square foot garage. Now remember, we're in Florida in the summer, unair conditioned. It was brutal. Shoved a couple Bridgeports and a couple lathes into it, and immediately started contacting our customers. Went to the customers and said, look guys, it's the same three guys you've known for a number of years engineering these machines, except we got a lot lower overhead. And surprisingly, a lot of the customers were willing to give us a shot, would give us a chance. I mean, we were a small company, just three guys, just getting going, but we had some really, really large customers who were very positive and very willing to give us that opportunity. And it really allowed us to take off fairly quickly. So we grew, fairly quickly over the next couple of years. So Doug, Bruce, and Aaron and I did a lot of crazy machines over those first couple of years. Then 2008 comes along, recession hits, bottom falls out of the market, pretty rough time for a lot of automation companies. And some of the larger companies in Florida and the Southeast ended up folding and going bankrupt. We were small enough to slide in under the radar. I think we were probably about 7-8 employees at that point. But we were able to do some of these smaller jobs, able to do some retrofix, take on jobs that maybe other people really weren't willing or able to do, and be able to survive. By the time 2009, 2010 came along, economy had turned around, and that's when things really just took off. There was a vacuum there. There were all these large automation companies, or larger automation companies, had gone out of business. And there was nobody really left to do this work. So, R&D and one or two others really just had exponential growth at that point. So it was, to answer one of the questions is, what's the secret? Part of the secret is being there when opportunity knocks. I've often said that, it's not necessarily luck and it's not necessarily skill. Luck is being there and being ready when opportunity knocks, and being able to take advantage of those opportunities that don't come along every time. So we were ready and we took advantage of it, and we were able to grow, very fast. So R&D continued to grow at a very good clip, probably in 20%, 30% year over year for quite a number of years. In 2010, we acquired Baytool. It was one of our suppliers that did most of our machine work. So now we were a vertically integrated machine shop, full machine shop with multiple CNC mills and lathes, with guys who knew us and knew our style. And those two machinists, Mark and John, are still with R&D to this day. I think celebrating their 10th anniversary coming up very soon. In 2018. We acquired a company called MDC Packaging. They made horizontal form, fill, seal, thermoforming machines, primarily for the medical device and consumer product markets. And it was a real good synergy. R&D was doing a lot of medical device assembly and medical device testing, consumer product assembly and consumer product testing. And it made perfect sense to then take those and integrate it into the packaging aspect of it. So now you could take parts, directly from the molding machine or from the stamping machines, introduce them into a automated work cell that put them together, inspected them, tested them, and then loaded them into the packaging machinery and sealed them ready for sterilization or ready for the store shelves, all without human intervention. So that's a secret that we learned as well, is make things easy for the customer to buy. They don't want to have to go out and write 5 different POs to 5 different suppliers. Even if you have to go buy the piece of equipment and integrate it for them, they're willing to pay a little bit extra for that, just so they don't have to deal with 2 people. They don't want to be the project managers. They want you to be the project managers. So this acquisition was definitely a learning lesson. It was a good piece of equipment, multiple pieces of equipment, standard pieces of equipment that MDC had. However, they were a little overly complex, a little more custom than they should have been. They could have been more standardized. And the cost of goods was far too high for the margins that we were trying to shoot for. So we embarked on a 2-year project of taking multiple engineers and completely revamping the product line, taking the base idea, but building upon it, making it easier to assemble with less parts, less complexity in the machine parts, choosing off-the-shelf components instead of making something custom in our machine shop. So buying parts from Misumi or Mastercar when we don't have to make them in the machine shop, and saving that machine shop time for the really complex stuff like the tooling and the intricate thermoforming tools and dies and things like that. So in mid 2020, in the midst of COVID, while we were all in this entire industry scrambling, trying to figure out if we were all going to go out of business, if we were, are we going to survive this pandemic? Which, spoiler alert, was probably the silver lining to COVID, is that the automation industry has been exploding the last couple of years. I was approached by a private equity firm, Sawmill Capital, who wanted to purchase R&D. They had been looking for an automation company for a number of years to add to their portfolio. So after a lot of soul searching, after a lot of thinking, after a lot of negotiations, I decided that it was probably time. I'd owned the company for 16 and a half years at that point. I decided that it was time to go ahead and sell. But they did ask me to stay on as president and run R&D automation, as well as work with iAutomation, to help them from a technology and a CTO standpoint. So we sold the company in late 2020. The company has continued to grow, has continued to flourish. R&D is up to 58-ish plus or minus employees right now. So over that 18-year period, grew from 3 guys in an unair-conditioned garage to a 58 employee company who is honestly, and I'm very proud, recognized as one of the leaders in the industry. We're really proud to be known for taking on those jobs that other companies maybe aren't willing to take on. We've never really backed down from challenges. What we've built there has been amazing, and I'm really proud of what they've done. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, depends on when this is going to air exactly, I decided that it was time for me to move on. I had, spent the last 18 years putting blood, sweat, and tears into a company, and it was time for me to go explore some other possibilities. I'm no longer with R&D, although it'll always be my baby. I decided that I was going to take some time off, think about what I wanted to do next, the next chapter. And I always had this, automation AMA thing in the back of my head. So I figured, you know what, keeps me a little busy, gives me something to do. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So here's episode number 1, right? So, getting back to, to the questions, after I've given you guys the background, and I promise you the future podcast will not be, as detailed of our history. But getting back to the questions, Jay asked, for those branching out on their own and thinking about how do you grow an automation company, from the ground up. I mentioned before, R&D was known on taking on those jobs that maybe some other people were not willing to. Maybe they're a little bit risky. It's a balancing act. You've got to be willing to take yourself outside your comfort zone and be innovative, and be able to attempt things that other people are going to say no to. But at the same time, you've got to be very careful too. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble taking on jobs and saying, oh yeah, we can do that, and then realizing you have no earthly idea how to make this work. So I've seen a lot of companies fail or get into financial problems because of taking on some very, very risky jobs. With risk, you need to build in reward. So if it is a risky job, you need to not be afraid to quote that job appropriately. And the customer needs to understand that this is a risky proposition. Maybe nobody has done this before, and that's something that's going to cost money. Something that I've always done is recommend a proof of principle. So it's a small PO, maybe it's $10, $20, $30, $40,000 to do some testing. Let's put a robot on a bench, or let's come up with let's machine some parts or 3D print some parts and do some testing and make sure that we can handle the product, or that we can assemble it the way or test it the way that the customer really wants to. I'd say another thing is, find a niche and fill it. There are so many specialty applications out there that not just one customer needs, multiple customers need. We were lucky early enough to be given a job by a hydraulic valve manufacturer. They put a lot of faith in us, gave us a lot of work in our early days, and we learned probably more about hydraulic valves than anybody outside of the hydraulic valve industry knows. We became experts, domain experts in hydraulic valves. That led us to be able to go on to do things like irrigation valves. And then we got into pneumatic valve, and then we got into cartridge valves, and then we did some more work in the hydraulic valve industry, and all of a sudden we became kind of known as the valve guys. We that was a specialty that we really, really knew well. For new companies who are up and coming or just trying to get going, I would say you need to look at reinvesting almost every single penny you're making back into the company. It's the only way you're going to grow. You need to be prepared to probably not make much money, if any money, for at least the first year to 2, quite possibly even 3. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't pay yourself a salary. We didn't for about 6 to 9 months just to kind of get things going. But don't expect to be pulling profits out of the business for a while. You need to reinvest. You need to buy new equipment. You need to expand your capabilities. You need to spend money on marketing, on advertising, on trade shows, which is a whole separate topic we'll cover in another episode. Joining trade associations. That leads me to another point is network. Use LinkedIn. Go to your trade associations. Go to events like Automate and Pack Expo and the A3 Business Forum. The connections and the partnerships I've made through all of that networking have been invaluable to me. I think it's part of why R&D was so successful, is all those connections. You also need somebody to speak to. Being an entrepreneur can be a lonely position sometimes. Everybody always comes to you for the answers, and sometimes you need to ask people questions. You need to bounce ideas off people. So find, whether it be a business partner or whether it be a business coach or a mentor, Find another company that's larger than yours that you really don't compete with, and offer to take the president or the VP operations out to lunch and just say, I just want to ask you some questions. How do you deal with some of these employee issues? How do you deal with some of these financial issues? Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? And certainly ask me some questions. I'm happy to share this information as well too, to the best of my ability. Hire for culture. Do not fall the trap of always hiring for technical ability. Now, technical ability is very important. We are a highly technical industry. You need to know what you're doing. You got to have good programmers. You got to have good designers and good engineers. You can teach technical ability. You cannot teach work ethics. You cannot teach pride in your company. You can't teach loyalty. Those are things that you can't teach. I can teach an engineer all the technical things that they need to know. So culture is super important. I've talked about that before. I'll probably talk about it again on another episode. The bottom line though is there is no magic bullet. People ask me all the time, how do I start an automation company? How do I be successful at automation? And I tell them, are you sure you wouldn't rather do something easier like alligator wrestling or brain surgery? This is not an easy industry. It's tough. But if you truly love it, it can be really rewarding. Seeing a product out on store shelves or in an emergency room or something like that your machine, that your creation made is truly amazing. So I'm going to wrap it up here. This has gone on a little longer than I thought it was going to. But this first episode is all about, introducing myself, kind of laying the groundwork. I promise the other episodes, I'm going to have more questions. I'm going to have a little quicker answers. I'm not going to drone on quite as long. Hopefully you've learned something from this. If you have any questions for me that you would like to have answered, at the end of this video, you're going to find my email address and my LinkedIn. Please go to either one and write me. I will try to get to all of your questions eventually. I hope you enjoyed this. I did. It's my first shot at it. I don't have a fancy studio. I don't have a real fancy microphone. I'm not even wearing a ball cap. I think it's a requirement now, right? You have to wear a ball cap to do a podcast. So I'm going to maybe have to go find one of those. But I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you around.